Good morning. These are the Rain Sessions. I'm Jennifer Shryock, where I interview people on how they found their purpose. I'm so excited today to talk to Fawn Germer. I can't wait to share her with you, share her story. I'm going to start out jumping right into a question. Fawn, what is it that you do?
Wow. If I'm at a cocktail party, I try to play it down. I just say I'm a writer, but actually I'm an author. I'm working on my ninth book. I'm a speaker, go all over the world and do leadership and motivational speaking. Working on a book now on relevance, which is a whole new line of speaking. And so I'm pretty excited, just as much as I was when I first started doing this career in 2001.
2001, your ninth book. I didn't realize you'd written so many, Fawn.
Yeah, you got to go out and buy a bunch, make me rich.
I'll do that. I'll solely line your pockets. I first met you when you were speaking, and you inspired me so much, and that's part of the reason I wanted to share you with my people today. Before we come back to this, tell me what you used to do. That was a big part of your story when I heard you speak.
Well, let's go way back, because when I was a
Okay.
kid, there was only one thing I wanted to do in my life, and that was to be a newspaper reporter. Newspapers were these things that used to come on your porch in the morning, and you used to open them up and read every day and find out what was going on in the world. And I grew up with newspapers. I was fascinated by them. I remember my daddy reading them and me reading the comics. And I was drawn to being a feature writer for newspapers. And that was the big plan. And when you talk about purpose, sometimes you just stumble into a bigger purpose. So I really liked lifestyles and features when I was working as a high school student and then while I was in college, and that was what I was primed to do. But when I got out of college, I was hired by the newspaper in Jacksonville, Florida, and the editor said, I'll hire you to features, but only after you've done a year on the city desk, because you can't write a feature story if you can't do a news story. So I said, all right, well, I was a born investigative reporter. He said, Germer, you could look under a rock and find a controversy. And that's true. I still do that. I am just so tuned to where something isn't quite right, and I figure it out. And I was really good at it, but it was really hard, because when you're bringing down the establishment and you're attacking on the status quo, their number one job is to discredit you. And to those who get enamored by the term fake news, let me tell you how investigative reporters work. You've got all these notes from interviews and notes that you've taken through files and records that you've looked at, and you write a sentence, and then you write your story, and then I would go sentence by sentence to say, where did I get this? So the notion that it's fake news, it's not fake news. It's not. When you look at a reliable source, sometimes people make mistakes, but they are not fabricating these stories, and nor was I. But like we see today, if I did something that was going to get somebody thrown out of office, they came at me. And it was really hard. And I got sick of taking the barbs where they'd say that I was a bad reporter. And ultimately, they would get thrown out of office and indicted and all of these things. But while it's going on, the attacks are coming at me. And I just kept on doing it, because at that point, my purpose was a different version of the same purpose I have right now, which is to make a difference. I wanted to change the world in whatever way I could. I knew I wasn't going to run a country or do anything on that scale, but I knew I could make a difference. And so there is somebody who will be in prison for life because of something I did. There are many laws that were changed, many people thrown out of their jobs or their offices because they were corrupt. And I was really proud that some work that I did helped to move the Violence Against Women Act. That was a big one in my heart. And as I kept going along, I never once felt any sort of gender bias, because the stories determined where things were played, until a female editor assigned me to do something on domestic violence. And I didn't really want that assignment, because we've read a lot of stories about battered women. And I finally said, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it different than anyone else. And that meant that I went and lived in a shelter over Christmas holidays with the battered women. And then I stayed with a stalking victim, and she had a row of locks on her front door, and then knives and guns within arm's reach everywhere she went in that place. I went through therapy with children for months. I went to a women's therapy group for a year. And when the first installment came out, there was a picture on the front page of the Rocky Mountain News, which was in Denver. I think many of your Montana people know that paper. And I had a picture of a woman with 2 black eyes. And the editor of the newspaper was on vacation when that assignment came down, and he came home and went crazy. He said, nobody wants to read about women getting beaten. Everybody knows women get beat. That's how he said it. Nobody wants to read about it. And he tried to kill the series. And we had committed, when I started it, that this was going to be a year-long project. And it was embarrassing if I was going to shut it down. And plus, that was wrong. So I found ways to make that thing so newsworthy that they had no choice but to let me cover it. And that meant getting very prominent women in the community to admit that they'd been battered. So that meant I had the daughter of a state legislator, the biggest woman developer, the biggest woman realtor, a member of the Denver City Council, the Secretary of State of Colorado, all came forward to me and told their stories of abuse. And these were so newsworthy, they had to run them. Well, the next year I started getting a lot of heat because he did not like what I had done. And he demoted me to what had been my initial dream. Remember, I wanted to be a feature writer. So he put me in features. But I had a great features editor who let me write about women's issues. So I kept doing the same thing. And then that ticked him off. So he took me out there and he threw me on the city desk and he says, you have to cover higher education, which I'd covered before and actually liked. But it was when all of the sexual harassment lawsuits were being filed. So then he wanted those killed. And I kept fighting. And the only way to get those stories in the paper wasn't to talk about the abuse that the women were experiencing, but rather to talk about how much money it was costing taxpayers in the lawsuits. Because there's no arguing with that story. So I had a lot of stories on that. And then it was just this back and forth until finally I realized that I was going nowhere there. And I said, my goal is to be a columnist. And he said, you're never going to be a columnist. You're only going to be a reporter. And I spent 2 years trying to dig my way out of that. Got a promotion to be the night assistant city editor at the Rocky Mountain News. Went to the first news meeting where they introduced me. My boss said, Fawn's the new night assistant city editor. And that guy who I referred to on stage as the boss hole, he had gotten a promotion. He happened to deign to come into that meeting. And when he heard about my promotion, he just held his hand up and he says, no, she's only a reporter. And that's all she'll ever be. And then I realized the problem was not me. I didn't have to win him over. I needed to leave. And so I got up and I went to my desk and I called the editor of the Tampa Tribune, who had been trying to recruit me for 4 years. And I said, if you're going to do it, you need to do it right now. So he said, let me work on it. And 2 days later, he came forward with a great offer. More money. I'd be back in Florida, which was my home where my parents were. Seemed like a great deal, except I had this other thing going on, which was I worked for a union newspaper. So I had a union protected job. Even though I worked for a jerk, he couldn't fire me. I had, with all my holidays thrown in, 5 weeks of vacation a year, great benefits, good health insurance, good paycheck, tons of friends, and I lived in the Rockies. And I just couldn't seem to take that job in Tampa until a friend told me, don't let security be your dangerous anchor. And then she said it again, don't let security be your dangerous anchor. And that was what inspired me to quit my job, move back to Florida, and go into an editing position where I used all those skills that made me a really good investigative reporter, very impatient, black and white thinking, get it done now, it's right or it's wrong. And I had to know how to win friends and influence people. And I sucked. People were quitting to get away from me. So I went looking for a book telling me how to be effective as a woman in a male-dominated environment. There wasn't such a book, friends said, well, you're a journalist. Why don't you write it? And I said, I'm so sick of people writing books they know nothing about. But I started to think about it, and nobody really had gone to the great women trailblazers who were firsts, who really paved the way so the rest of us can do our jobs now, and ask them what they learned the hard way. So I started working on such a book, requesting interviews and quickly getting very big names to the table. And they all kept talking about how you have to take a risk and bet on yourself, and that the only way you find your true north and your true success is if you take a risk. And I was having trouble doing all my work with that editing job and writing the book. So knowing that the book was going to be a runaway bestseller, I just quit my job to do that full time.
Wow.
I had this vision, I would quit my job, I'd finish the interviews, and then get my first draft done in 3 months, and then in 6 months it'd be ready to go, and at 9 months it would be out, and then Oprah would find it at the Barnes & Noble and wake me up in the middle of the night and then bring me to Chicago, and we'd be best friends, and I'd be having dinner at the condo with her and Stedman and Gail. And instead what happened was I quit my job to do this, and I couldn't sell my book. It was rejected by every major publisher in the world.
Even though you were an award-winning journalist and had all these stories under your belt, visibility.
Well, it didn't matter if it was a great book either. I just couldn't sell it. And I tell people, you have one considerable talent, and you have to find out what it is if you don't know. Mine, obviously, is information. Obviously, whenever I hit the wall, and we always keep hitting the wall again and again later on in our careers, I just know that I have to get more information to figure it out. So in that instance, I'd had a source on the Board of Regents in Colorado, and her son was an editor at Houghton Mifflin. And I said, can you get him to read my proposal and tell me what's wrong with it? And she said, sure, because moms will always volunteer their son's time. And he was dodging my calls because what he said was, you have to rewrite your book. And I said, why? And he goes, because it's format. You're giving all these women their own chapters. You have to tie it together thematically if you want a big publisher. I said, oh, okay. So he was worried about it. I'm a writer. The rewriting is the easy part. So I rewrite it, have a new proposal. There's a bidding war on the book. I have my dream tour lined up, and I get my first copy of the book the day before 9/11. And then the tour gets canceled. And again, I had to fight. And I rented a Ford Escort, and I drove to every place in the United States where I knew people that I could stay with, and did local media. And I wrote my 29 letters to Oprah. And the biggest thing was doing that first signing at the Tattered Cover in Denver, because that fed into the New York Times bestseller list, the Denver Post list. So my book was a bestseller early on because all of my old friends showed up and had a competition to prove how much they love Fawn by buying the most copies. So, yeah.
Fawn, there are 3 things that I keep getting these chills of truth, and I want to restate them before we keep going. I'm all in. I'm all in. The first one is not to let security be your anchor, I think you said.
Yeah, your dangerous anchor.
Yes, exactly. And it's, of course, when I'm working with clients, this is such a big deal because security matters, or at least we think it really does. And to take the risk, there's so much to it. So I'm thrilled to hear your story. And
the only security is in you.
That's right. And then you talk about information.
Wait, let me say.
Oh,
if
sorry.
I stayed with the Rocky Mountain News, think about it. What happened to that newspaper? It's out of business. There was no security there. There was no security. The security was always right here.
Right. You had it within you all along.
Yes, click, click, click. I do that on stage.
Do you? Perfect.
Ruby slippers.
And then you talk about information and how that's your superpower, so to speak. And for you, some of that is external, you're doing research. But I think for all of us along the way, we're learning how, maybe it's within, how do I best perform? So the 1, 2, 3, and then this willingness to get out there and drive across the country to overcome these obstacles. And it was a huge obstacle. Yeah. Planes are down.
Yeah.
The
Right.
tour is canceled and you made one yourself. So I know there's more to come, but I just needed to repeat those because I'm getting those chills of truth as you're speaking about security, information, knowing who you are and what's going on around you, and then making something happen.
Right. And then, and here's the other one that's kind of cool. So I write my 29 letters to Oprah, and my agent says, Fawn, you are obsessing. And I say, Caroline, 29 is not obsessing. 30 is obsessing. But remember, I'm writing these letters, and Oprah was getting at that time about 4,000 publications and books a week. And it was needle in the haystack. But at 9/11, everybody'd given up, which meant, I don't know, I'm sure she was still getting a lot, but she wasn't getting as many. And somehow it broke through. And that lesson really is that when everyone else is cowering in fear or thinks the window's closed, it's open for those who dare to jump through it. And, there's always opportunity when others see, no opportunity to spare.
Yes, that persistence, that vision. And I guess I also want to come back to this vision you had was so clear. You don't need a vision board. You've got the vision. Yeah. Oprah finds you. She calls you in the night. It's very specific. And when we hold on to a very specific vision, all the naysayers can shake their heads and wag their fingers. That's motivating to have that vision and to hold on to it and trust. Okay, maybe it won't happen, but I'm going to keep living towards it either way.
Right. There's a file in my office there just filled with all those rejection letters I got. And if you read them, it's so obvious that the universe was saying, you have failed at this, you need to find something else to do. And I don't know what kept me in the game with it. I have no idea. None. I don't know. But I kept moving. And, that's another thing I learned. Man, I went swimming. This is a bad hair day.
You look fabulous, Fawn.
I learned that when you hit the wall, all you can do is put one foot in front of the other. And you just move forward. And, it's such a great metaphor because I'm a beach hiker and I love going on these very long walks, but I've got pretty bad feet. So that by mile 10, I'm in some pain. But all I know is if I put one foot here and then one here, sooner or later, I'm getting where I go. It's just a fact. If you one foot in front of the other, when you're walking that beach, you will get to where you have to get. And it is the same when you hit the wall with your career or with something difficult in your personal life. If you just keep moving forward a little bit, you get where you're going. So to tie this into purpose, it's kind of interesting because you look at what happened as a reporter it was almost as there was something ordained that threw me into women's issues. Because before that time, I was really doing political issues and graft and corruption and, crime stories, right? And then when that domestic violence thing happened, and then I started getting in trouble for covering women's issues, then I started understanding, wait a minute, I've been insulated from this. There really is a gender issue. And then I had that big awakening, and I came and I went to the Tampa Tribune. I was one of one other female editor at that time. And then, and a senior editor was a woman. And so I really didn't know in a male-dominated environment what I was supposed to do. So once again, I'm feeling the gender issue. And then that was what launched my career as an author. Now, I've since written books for men and women, and my next one is definitely in that vein. But I'm also, somebody that I know a lot about women's issues and women's leadership. And that, to me, is my purpose, is to make sure no other woman ever has a boss hole treat them like that guy treated me by bullying me.
He did bully you, and to call you out in your introduction meeting.
You're wow. Right. I know.
But there are stories like that all over the world. You're telling yours.
Oh, no, but everybody has a story of someone trying to get in their way. And before I heard the term boss hole, which is obviously the best term in history because everyone's had one, but I used to say that I had a tormentor because he was the opposite of a mentor. It is amazing what I accomplished because he got in my way. I mean, that's really interesting to me, is that if he hadn't done that, I probably would have still been at that newspaper when it went down.
Oh, Fawn, thank you so much. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so interesting. I did a book club last spring on the book Diana Herself, An Allegory of Awakening. And one of the lessons within the book is when you confront your nemesis. So you've had an awakening, everything seems peaceful and beautiful, and then you confront your nemesis, and it's in that confrontation where we find our conviction, where we mold
absolutely
further into the force that we're meant to be. And it's so easy to interpret a mentor or obstacles or the brick wall as, yeah, don't do this, you're being guided elsewhere. But in fact, it's the heat that makes you hard and directed, convicted.
Well, and then think about another thing. If my first book had sold like I had planned, truth was, probably would have been a mid-list book, would have come, and it would have gone. And I would have had to go back into a newsroom somewhere, into a dying industry. But because it took so long to get that book out, 3 years, it took 3 years of my life to get that going, where I'm worried about my mortgage and everything else. I was definitely the starving author. But that's what really brought the biggest life change. Was a friend says to me, you know, you should think about being a professional speaker. They make a lot of money. And I said, you get paid for that? And she goes, sorry about that. She says, yeah, you get paid for that. And I looked into it, and sure enough, you get a lot of money for that. So I pursued that. And then if I had had the success early, I wouldn't have done that. And speaking is a blast for me. It is what I want. It's what I love. And it never would have occurred to me if I had not hit that wall. So I really believe that when you're on your path, you are getting pushed to what you're there to learn. And so now let me wrap this into real purpose, because you can sit there and rack your brain and figure that out, and it'll change until you realize that it's really the same for all of us. When my book wasn't selling, I was in a women's group, and we would have a topic of the week or the month. I don't remember. I think it was monthly meetings. And one meeting, we didn't have a topic. And while they're trying to figure out the topic, I just blurted out the words, I don't know what my purpose is. Because if I wasn't going to be Fawn the author, and I was no longer Fawn the journalist, who was I going to be? And it just landed with such a thud. I'm not kidding. The whole room went silent. And then Teresa said, me either. And then Tammy didn't know. And then Pam shrugged. And then we go around the room and nobody knew their purpose. And we get to Bet, my friend Bet, who had ovarian cancer and was dying. And I thought for sure at that point she would have that clarity, right? And she's like, I don't know. So we all soldiered through, and Teresa and Tammy both went back to school. And then Pam got a different job. And I figured out what was the problem with my book. And Bet lived. And she's not alive, but I mean, she lived while she was living. And by that, I mean, we went kayaking in December once at Caladesi Island. Now, to you people out there who are the Montana crew, this may not seem odd to you, but to a Floridian, she dove into the water in December. We do not go in the water in December because our blood is thin and it is cold. And I said, are you out of your mind? And she goes, it's beautiful. And she just dove into every day that she still had. She lived her life. She lived a wild, wonderful life. Her family, she had all kinds of siblings. And they were great. Everyone would take a shift. So they'd be there for her for a week. And then they'd have a handoff and have a changeover day. So all 8 kids took a shift taking care of her, and then they'd start over. So you saw all of this love and life. And then one day I was speaking, and let me back up. My very first book signing in Tampa, they were able to get her there. She was sick, but it was a really big deal that she could get there. And then after that, she started to really go downhill. And I remember I went to visit her once, and she told me that she had seen Jesus. And I said, wow. I said, well, if you could you kind of come back and let me know how this Jewish thing's going to work out for me? And she goes, you are so brassy. Well, the next time I saw her, I was with Pam. And she, you knew, it was days, when she looked scary. She couldn't talk. And so I leaned over to her and I go, just let me know if there's a super Walmart in heaven. She rolled her eyes, and then Pam looks at me and she goes, it's heaven, Fawn. Of course there's a super Walmart, right? And we got a smile. And then a few days after that, I got the call from her brother saying that she had passed and asking me to write her obituary. Now, as a journalist, that's the most important thing you write for anybody. It's the last word. It's so important that I was paralyzed when my own parents died. I couldn't write their obits. I had to have friends do it. But when I started to think about Bet and her life and about that conversation when none of us knew what our purpose was, Bet showed us our purpose. Your purpose is to live your life. And we get so caught up in whatever is the supposed problem of the day, whether it's work or relationships, that we forget to walk outside and breathe fresh air. And I would say, never waste a sunset. We forget that our purpose is to be here and to laugh and to live and to actually experience mindfully what it is that we're doing. So, I just got out of the pool and swim in my laps. And you can get in there and it just be a workout, or you can get there and you can feel the water moving against your skin and how great it feels to be able to swim a mile and to just, have that breath left in me and to have gotten beyond my heart issue last year. It's like everything gives me this gratitude because I am living my purpose, which is to just simply live. And when you understand that your purpose is to live, then you have a more spiritual understanding about what's going on in here. And I never tell people what to believe, just believe something, I hope, right? But that you understand that there's a lot of noise going on and that it can be very, very grounding and simple to just remember it's about the sunrise, the sunset, and being here in the moment and knowing you're here. And I think about that daily because the first thing I do in the morning is go walk my dog in this beautiful park near where I live. And we go hiking. And and I always have headphones on, which is a distraction, but it's also precious time with people I love. So I feel like I'm on a hike with them. And one day I had the headsets in, and I was talking to my aunt, who has since passed, and she was in an assisted living. And it was Thanksgiving, and I said, I just wanted to thank you for all of those Thanksgivings you made for our family, because I know those were a lot of work, and they're some of my best memories as a child. And she says, oh yeah, it was my pleasure. I like doing it. And I'm waiting for Alan to come and get me. We're going to go to his house. And then she said something that really shook me. She said, you don't know what it's like to have to wait for someone to get you to take you where you want to go, and to not be able to do that on your own. And that has in turn made me much more mindful even when I'm driving, because how lucky we are to be able to just go. And when I'm hiking, I look at the trees and hear the birds and experience it. And when I'm washing the dishes, I think, gosh, I'm really glad I'm in this house. So your purpose really is not as complicated as you want to make it. It really is just live well. And I know people who have succeeded at the highest levels. And I know people who are so rich, and they are no happier than I am. Not in the slightest. In fact, I can say with only one exception, I'm happier than any of them. And the other exception, she might be as happy as me. I guess it depends on the day. But that, I think, once our basic security of having food to eat and shelter over our head, once we've met that, the amount of happiness available is the same for all of us. And once we know we're safe, we can all be so happy. And so there are times when I have to refocus on that. You know, you and I were talking politically. This has been a hard time for me because I'm worried about us. And I'm going to take a time out from Facebook and from the news so that I can remember what's really here,
Right.
and live and love and enjoy the moment, because that is my purpose.
Fawn, what legacy do you want to leave?
Oh, well, you know, somebody was reading my LinkedIn profile out loud on a radio show, and he goes, "Wow, this is really impressive." And I said, "You know, when I die, I want my obituary to say, Fawn Germer died. She was a great friend, a true daughter. She lived and she loved and she laughed. She was a passionate kayaker, an outstanding cyclist, and hiked many beaches. And she was a speaker and an author." Because the big picture is much bigger for me than anything. Oh, and it needs to say it was a badass adventurer, because that's more important than anything. I'm an adventurer.
You
I'm
are.
here to experience. So that's my legacy, is to show people how to live a more meaningful, happy life. My work is important to me. It is very important to me, but it is not me. And a lot of people get confused on that. And if all you can say about yourself is what you're doing, you have some work to do on the inside, because you're making it far less fulfilling and far more complicated.
Truth. What advice would you give? You've been giving wonderful morsels of advice throughout to someone who feels that they missed the purpose boat. They don't know their purpose.
Breathe. Go do something fun, and be mindful. Be in the moment, so that you know that you are experiencing all that is here for you. And your purpose is simple. It's just go find your happiness and live your joy, and stop comparing yourself to other people or expectations of what you think you should have done, because you can't fix anything behind you, right? And you may be able to alter things in front of you, but the one thing you know for sure is what you have right now. My mom didn't know she was going to be paralyzed by a stroke when she was 66. You know, Brenda Barnes, the first woman superstar CEO, didn't know that she was going to, so young, get a stroke and then never work another day. So you have to live now. You don't know what's coming, you know. So stop beating yourself up because you don't have the answer. The answer's right there. Live.
Breathe. Thank
Breathe.
you, Fawn.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We'll include some links and some info on how people can find you. Thanks again.
Thanks.